Have you ever noticed how strange silence can feel between two people who once talked all the time? At first, it doesn't seem like much. A day passes, maybe two. Then a week goes by. Neither of you reaches out. No text, no call, no "Hey, how have you been?" And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet question begins to form. Why? Because if two people once cared enough to talk every day, how can both of them suddenly stop trying at the exact same time? Was it pride? Was it fear? Or was something deeper happening beneath the surface that neither person fully understood? Here's where it gets interesting. When both people stop reaching out, it rarely means what people think it means. Most people interpret silence as indifference. They assume the other person doesn't care anymore. They tell themselves a simple story to make sense of the situation. But human relationships are rarely simple. And the truth is, mutual silence often reveals far more about the emotional dynamics between two people than constant communication ever could. Before we go any further, there's something important to make clear. This conversation is not about encouraging manipulation. It's not about playing games with people's emotions. And it's certainly not about interfering with someone else's commitments or boundaries. Understanding psychology is not about gaining control over others. It's about gaining awareness. Awareness of how people behave when they feel vulnerable. Awareness of the emotional forces that shape connection, distance, attraction, and hesitation. Because when we understand these patterns, we become more thoughtful about our own actions. We become more respectful of the emotional complexity inside every relationship. And most importantly, we become more honest with ourselves. So when both of you stop reaching out, what does it really mean? To answer that, we need to understand something about human emotional behavior that most people overlook. Connection creates expectation. When two people start talking regularly, their brains begin to build small psychological routines. The sound of a message notification, the anticipation of a reply, the feeling of being seen. These moments might seem trivial on the surface, but they create a powerful emotional loop. Every time someone receives attention, validation is quietly reinforced. Every time someone responds warmly, a subtle bond strengthens. Over time, this creates an emotional rhythm between two people. And when that rhythm suddenly stops, something fascinating happens. The silence becomes a test, not a conscious game, but a psychological test nonetheless. Because when communication pauses, each person begins asking themselves the same internal question. Should I be the one who reaches out? Now you might think this question is simple, but it's not. It's layered with emotion, pride, fear of rejection, fear of looking too eager, fear of discovering that the other person doesn't care as much as you hoped. And this is where most people get it wrong. When both people remain silent, it doesn't necessarily mean neither person cares. Sometimes it means both people care, but neither one wants to risk being the one who cares more. Pay attention to this. Human beings are incredibly sensitive to emotional imbalance. If someone feels like they are always the one initiating conversations, they begin to wonder whether their attention is being reciprocated. So eventually, they pull back. Not because their feelings disappeared, but because they want to see what happens when they stop trying. And if the other person is doing the exact same thing, at the exact same time, you get something unusual. Mutual hesitation. Both people waiting. Both people wondering. Both people telling themselves stories about what the silence must mean. But here's where it becomes even more psychologically complex. Silence doesn't just create distance. It creates interpretation. When we don't hear from someone, our minds fill the gap with assumptions. Maybe they lost interest. Maybe they met someone else. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe they never cared in the first place. The human brain hates uncertainty, so it rushes to create explanations, even when the truth is still unfolding. This is why two people can be thinking about each other constantly, while neither one sends a message. Because both are protecting themselves from the same perceived risk, rejection. Have you ever noticed how quickly people can go from feeling confident to feeling uncertain the moment communication slows down? That's not weakness. That's attachment psychology at work. Attachment theory tells us that people develop patterns of emotional connection based on past experiences. Some people lean toward anxious attachment, meaning silence feels threatening to them. Others lean toward avoidant attachment, meaning they instinctively create distance when emotions start to feel intense. When these patterns collide, silence becomes even more complicated. An anxious person may want to reach out, but hold back out of fear of appearing needy. An avoidant person may feel the urge to reconnect, but suppress it because vulnerability feels overwhelming. So both people stay quiet, not because the connection meant nothing, but because each person is navigating their own emotional defenses. And here's something subtle that many people overlook. When two people stop reaching out, their behavior outside the conversation often reveals what they are really feeling. Pay attention to shifts in energy, eye contact when you unexpectedly see each other, the tone of a voice that suddenly becomes softer, the way someone pauses before speaking. These tiny moments reveal internal conflict. Because when feelings still exist beneath the surface, the body often betrays what the mind tries to hide. Someone might appear calm in public, but their breathing changes when you enter the room. They may speak casually, but their eyes linger just a little longer than necessary. These micro behaviors matter, because they show that silence is not always emotional absence. Sometimes it is emotional containment. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. When silence continues long enough, both people begin to experience a push and pull dynamic inside themselves. Part of them wants to reach out. Another part says, don't. One moment they feel certain the connection mattered. The next moment they question whether they imagined it. This internal tug-of-war is extremely common. Desire pulls one direction, self-protection pulls the other. And whichever force feels stronger in a given moment determines whether someone picks up the phone or stays silent another day. But the situation becomes even more layered when mixed signals appear. Maybe you see them being warm and engaging in person, but distant over text. Maybe they laugh easily in group settings, yet become quiet when it's just the two of you. Maybe they initiate conversation once, then disappear again. This kind of behavior often reflects emotional conflict. Someone may feel drawn to the connection, but also uncertain about what it means or where it could lead. So they alternate between closeness and distance, warmth and withdrawal, engagement and silence, and to the outside observer, it looks confusing, but internally, it makes perfect sense, because the human heart often wants connection at the same time the mind is trying to protect itself from vulnerability. Have you ever noticed how people sometimes behave differently depending on who else is present? This is another powerful clue. In group environments, individuals often manage their image more carefully. They become aware of how their behavior might be interpreted by others. So someone who feels emotionally drawn to you might act neutral or reserved in public. But when the environment shifts to a quiet or private moment, their demeanor changes. Their tone softens. Their attention becomes more focused. Their body language relaxes. These contrasts reveal something important. Emotions rarely disappear simply because communication pauses. They often continue quietly in the background. Now, this doesn't mean every silent connection is secretly full of hidden feelings. Sometimes silence truly does mean someone has moved on. Sometimes people stop reaching out because the emotional investment simply faded. But here's the key difference. When someone has truly detached, their behavior becomes consistently neutral. There is no tension, no hesitation, no subtle shifts in energy when you appear. Indifference is calm. But unresolved feelings create friction, tiny moments of awkwardness, unexpected bursts of warmth, or brief flashes of emotional distance that seem to come out of nowhere. These contradictions are signs that the emotional story between two people may not be fully finished. But this is where integrity becomes essential. Understanding psychological dynamics should never be used to manipulate someone's emotions or create artificial attraction. Real connection is built on honesty, respect, and emotional maturity. If two people care about each other, communication eventually needs to become direct. Because silence can only reveal so much. At some point, clarity requires courage. It requires someone to say what they actually feel. Not to pressure the other person, not to force an outcome, but to replace confusion with honesty. Emotional integrity. and it protects something even more important than the relationship itself: self-respect. When you value yourself, you don't rely on guessing games or endless psychological analysis to define your worth in someone else's life. You observe behavior, you recognize patterns, and you choose how much emotional energy you invest based on the reality in front of you. Sometimes that means reaching out, sometimes it means letting silence remain silence. But either way, your sense of identity remains intact, because your value doesn't come from someone else's response. It comes from the clarity and dignity with which you show up in your relationships. So when both of you stop reaching out, what does it really mean? It might mean pride is getting in the way of vulnerability. It might mean both people are quietly waiting for reassurance. It might mean unresolved emotions are still present, but hidden beneath layers of caution. Or it might mean the connection served its purpose and naturally reached its conclusion. The only way to know is to observe with honesty and respond with maturity. Pay attention to patterns, not isolated moments. Look for consistency. Look for sincerity. Look for whether someone's actions align with the emotional story you hope is true. Because ultimately, strong relationships are not built on silence or uncertainty. They are built on clarity, on mutual effort, on two people choosing connection instead of waiting for the other to make the first move. And if you found yourself thinking about someone while watching this video, that's worth reflecting on. Human connections are rarely simple, but understanding the psychology behind them can change the way you see every interaction in your life. If this kind of deep psychological insight into relationships resonates with you, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Because the more we understand human behavior, the more intentional we become about the relationships we build, and the more powerful our connections become over time.